recent study of human brains showed there are enough microplastics in them to make a plastic spoon. Researchers found 50% more microplastics in the brain samples in 2024 as the study that happened in 2016. But there are differing takes on the harm plastics actually cause. While some scientists and healthcare workers have said they harm our health, other experts say just finding the plastics doesn't mean that they're actually causing any real damage. But the headline itself is shocking. Plastics in your brain. So of course we had to ask Dr. Kohli to shed some light on this study. So I mean, you hear about it, it's just really scary. What does it mean?
Well, what I'm really surprised about, Alex, is that we have more plastics in our brain today than we did just 8 years ago. And the distribution of the organs that it goes to also surprises me. So they looked at the brain, they looked at the liver and the kidneys. Now you think about the liver and the kidneys, they detox our blood. So the concentration in these detox organs was actually lower than it was in our brain. And the parts of the brain where they found many of these plastics were the frontal cortex, which is that front part of our brain that's involved in our personality, in our executive function. It's involved in risk of developing certain types of dementia. So all of this raises a lot of questions when you have, 0.5% of the brain by weight being plastic. Are these plastics causing harm?
Well, and how do they get there is my question. Are we breathing it in? Like, how does it happen?
So primarily through our diet, we are breathing in some plastics. So when you're driving on the road and the rubber tires are kind of aerosolizing some plastics, we breathe that in. Some of it is through skin contact. But really what they're thinking is that, we're using plastic contaminated water to water our crops. And so the food, it gets in there. And then the cattle, so the meat has a lot of plastics in it. If you look in the grocery store, a lot of our meat products actually have plastics in them. And then the manure that we're using to feed the crops, that itself has plastics too. So it's actually a biomagnification of plastics, so to speak, in many of our food and drinking supply. You also think about all the things we use on a day-to-day basis, whether that's grocery bags, whether that's water bottles, whether that's any of those types of things. We microwave, our food in plastic containers. All of those are ways for plastics to make their way into our body. Now, how they actually get into the brain is hard to know, but they've actually made it into the testes, into the gastrointestinal tract, into the placenta, which means for pregnant women, it's going to baby as well, and into many of the other organs.
Well, you did mention dementia, and so I want to ask about that more specifically. Any more studies, research kind of linking those two closely?
Yeah, so what was really interesting in this study is they looked at the patients that had dementia, and those patients had 3 to 5-fold as much plastic in their brain. Now, the question is the chicken or the egg, right? Is it that dementia made their brains leaky and therefore the plastic got in? Because we know that part of the problem in dementia are leaky brains. Or is it the opposite, that the plastic itself was causing problems? But we do know that in animal studies and in cells, the plastic can be incredibly disruptive to cellular processes. So it's causing hormonal disruptions, it's causing disruptions in the way that the tissues replicate and repair their DNA damage. So our tissues were not designed to have plastic, but the FDA actually says there is no clear evidence that plastic in the doses that we're finding in our foods and our water supply is actually harmful to our health.
I mean, do you believe that?
So me as a cardiologist, no. In fact, there was a study that came out of Italy that really had me shocked, where they looked at plaque, cholesterol deposits in people that had big pieces of plastic in it. And the patients that had the plastic particles had a significantly higher risk of having heart attack and stroke down the line. Now, could those patients also be indulging in other bad behaviors like smoking, and they're eating processed foods and those types of things? That sort of remains to be seen. But personally, I know this type of work really makes me much more aware of the plastic that I'm using, trying to minimize my risk.
Yeah, and so that's my next question before we let you go. I mean, how can we protect ourselves? Is it as simple as just don't use plastic?
Kind of, as best as you can. I mean, it's hard to get away from plastic, but don't store your food in plastic. Definitely don't microwave in plastic, because that heating up actually causes it to be released, especially those single-serve plastics. So you want to use, glass as much as possible. Same for our water bottles. There's 240,000 different plastics in a 1-liter plastic water bottle. So you really want to try to drink water out of glass container or metal container. When I go to the grocery store now, I take reusable bags. I don't take those plastic bags at Target or King Soopers or whatever. That's another thing. Dry cleaning, you don't want to you put your clothes in those plastic bags. You want to try to use reusable fabric bags. So just try to become aware of how much plastic we're using, because the amount of plastic in the brain has really correlated with the plastic waste that we're generating in terms of how it's increasing in our organs.
Well, there's a lot to think about, when you speak about it in that way. I wouldn't even think like the clothes that you buy or you get from the dry cleaning, that could potentially, factor into all this as well. So
Yeah, our skin is our largest organ. Anything we put
Wow.
on it gets in there. So.
as always, you leave us with a lot of think about, Dr. Kohli. Thank you so much.